Orange County 911, this is Rob.
Hi, I think I just heard gunshots outside.
Okay. How many shots did you hear?
4.
You heard 4?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Did you see anyone by chance?
No, I mean, I was laying awake in bed.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right, you want to speak to an officer about this?
Well, I don't know.
This is Eve Carson. In the early hours of March 5th, 2008, her lifeless body was found lying in a pool of blood in the middle of an intersection. Her body was discarded like damaged goods. To her shocked family, it made no sense. Eve had no enemies. In fact, she was a kind soul with lots of friends. So who would want to do this to her? And how were her killers caught? This is the full, disturbing story of Eve Carson. Today's story takes us to North Carolina, the home of the delicious Krispy Kreme donuts and the place where the Wright brothers tested their prototypes and perfected their craft. In 1903, North Carolina became the home of the first powered flight. But let's skip ahead a whole century for this case. Today, North Carolina is known, among other things, for its economic imbalance. Its capital city, Raleigh, has seen a huge boom in tech, biotech, and STEM. But as the big cities are rising, the smaller cities are losing, and more people are finding themselves in poverty. One of the smaller towns in North Carolina is Chapel Hill, the home of Eve Carson in 2008. Eve was born on November 19, 1985, in Athens, Georgia, to parents Teresa and Bob Carson. She grew up with her brother Andrew and her parents in a tightly knit, loving home. But Eve was as much about family life as she was about academic performance. She was president of her high school student body at Clark Central High School, where she was also class valedictorian. Eve was also a member of the school's academic team and vice president of the school's National Honor Society. As a teenager, she spent time volunteering as a peer educator at the Athens Area Attention Home, a safe house for abused and runaway teenagers, served as a page on the U.S. House of Representatives, and worked as a lab student in a stem cell research laboratory at the University of Georgia. Then Eve became the recipient of the prestigious Moorhead Kane Scholarship. She was offered scholarships at Princeton and Yale University, but chose the University of North Carolina because she wanted to attend a public school. At UNC, she was a North Carolina Fellow, a member of the Pi Beta Kappa Honor Society, and a double major in political science and biology. To say Eve was hardworking would be an understatement. She had made it her life's work to be the top performer everywhere she went, and the end goal was to help people the best way she could.
Hey y'all, my name is Eve Carson and I'm your student body president. It's great to be in Chapel Hill. If you're a returning student, can't wait to see you again. If you're a new student, welcome to the Carolina family. So this is the Student Government Office, room 2501 in the new Student Union, and as your representation, this office is here for you. We've got computers you can use, there's a printing station, there's another printer on the other side.
You might ask how Eve found the time to be a top performing student and a student representative. Well, she'd known nothing else. She'd been volunteering, working hard towards her grades, and helping her peers ever since she was a young teen.
This is Lauren, she's a senior class marshal. There are 3 branches of student government: executive, legislative, and judicial. And so executive branch, or E-branch, and student congress are located in this office. There's so many incredible ways that you can get involved, and I've really found that my experience has been enriched by the ways that we give back to our communities and to our campus. Also, I personally invite you to come hang out with me. I spend a lot of time in this office and I love saying hi and meeting new people. So if I can help you, or if I can help you figure out how you want to get involved on campus, please come by and let's talk.
During the summer breaks, Eve volunteered in Ecuador, Egypt, and Ghana, working as a rural medical assistant and teaching computer skills to locals. During the rest of the school year, Eve lived in Chapel Hill, a small town of 60,000 people, and a big part of the UNC campus. Eve's family had no worries about their daughter. She lived in a small, safe university town with a low crime rate and a lot of young people looking to start a life for themselves. Eve thought she was safe too. She had no idea that 2 real-life monsters had set their eyes on her. It was just before sunrise on March 5th, 2008. Eve's neighbor in Hillcrest Circle heard an awful noise and she decided to call the police.
Orange County 911, this is Rob.
Hi, I think I just heard gunshots outside.
Okay. How many shots did you hear?
Over.
You heard 4?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Did you see anyone by chance?
No, I mean, I was laying awake in bed.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right, you want to speak to an officer about this?
Well, I don't know.
The woman had heard 1 gunshot sound, then a woman screaming, then 3 more gunshots. Barely awoken, she wondered if she had heard right, but then someone else called 911.
Orange County 911.
Maybe, sir. Scream within 3 shots. Sound like a young woman.
Okay, you said you heard gunshots?
3 gunshots.
How long ago did this happen?
5 seconds.
And you said you heard a female scream?
3 times, yeah.
Did anything like this ever happen before?
I've heard gunshots before. I don't think I've heard screaming.
Within minutes, a police car arrived at the scene. The officers were shocked to find the body of a young woman lying in a pool of blood at the intersection of Hillcrest Road and Hillcrest Circle. Eve had been shot several times with a handgun from up close. She didn't even have the chance to fight for her own life. And the truth about her last moments alive were even darker. But the police had yet to find out how Eve died, and who she even was. At that time, all they knew was that they had a female into her early 20s dead at the scene. On the morning of March 5th, Eve's housemates began to worry, as they realized she'd never made it home that night. It was strange. Eve wasn't the type to go to overnight parties or spend the night at a random place without letting them know beforehand. So they called the university, hoping she was already there, but the staff there was also wondering where she was. This was a bad sign. Sadly, when the housemates called the police called them to the station to identify a body. It was, indeed, Eve. Everyone was shocked and heartbroken. Her family didn't even get to say goodbye to their only daughter. And nothing made any sense to anyone who knew Eve. She was a popular student, a well-loved human being with nothing but kindness in her past. As the police struggled to gain knowledge of possible enemies or people who might have hated her, they got nothing. Everyone seemed to love Eve, and Eve didn't seem to have any enemies. Well, not that she knew of. Something else was shocking. A young student had died in the middle of an intersection, minutes away from a big university campus. How could something like this happen and not be prevented? People were downright scared for their lives. No clues had been left at the scene, and there was no confirmation that this was a one-off murder. If Eve wasn't murdered by a personal enemy, then perhaps it was a robbery murder, and this could happen again and again to more young women in the area. All the police could do at that time was try to get an exact timeline of events. The last time anyone had seen Eve was on March 5th at around 1:30 a.m. Her housemates left the house to get a drink, and she stayed home to study. No one knew what Eve did between 1:30 and 5 a.m. that morning, but it was clear she didn't sleep. The next morning, the police found Eve's Toyota Highlander a few minutes away from the crime scene.
Now to Chapel Hill, where a police tip line has been ringing all day. Investigators are working every lead in the search for Eve Carson's killer. They're going through every inch of her SUV. It's believed the killer shot her in a neighborhood near campus, then took off in her truck.
But as the days passed, news reporters still spoke about no potential suspects and a lack of evidence.
Police do not have any suspects in this case, and they are calling the murder of Eve Carson a random act of violence. They've spent much of the last 48 hours trying to obtain her phone records, her bank records, and looking through her SUV for any sign of evidence that could help them solve this case.
Whoever had murdered Eve had done a great job covering their tracks. The police were desperate to get the public's help in this case.
And Chapel Hill Police also announced today that there is a $25,000 reward for anyone who could help them solve this crime.
After the police analyzed Eve's computer, they concluded that she had last accessed her computer just after 3:30 a.m. This meant that she was at home that night, awake. Also, it meant that she was kidnapped sometime after that time and before 5 a.m. Then the police accessed Eve's financial accounts. At 3:55 a.m., someone made several attempts to withdraw cash from Eve's bank account. Clearly this wasn't Eve. She would have known her own PIN number. The police traced these attempts to an ATM at the University Mall, very close to the crime scene. $700 was taken out from that ATM. Then the police found more activity at a drive-through Bank of America ATM. Here's the catch. Finally, the police got a picture as the drive-through ATM had a CCTV camera installed. This man was driving Eve's SUV and using her credit card to get cash out. Perhaps unsurprisingly, he was wearing a hoodie and a cap, trying to cover his face as much as he could. In another grainy image, it appears as if there was a second person in the backseat of the car. Less than half an hour later, Eve was dead. The Chapel Hill police now had a suspect to look for. It turned out to be two suspects, both of which, stupidly enough, continued to use Eve's credit card throughout the town the following days. At 12:39 p.m., the police tracked Eve's card being used at Moorhead Avenue Mini Mart in Durham. 24 hours later, again, and the next day, again. Luckily, the last spot, Carolina Food Mart, had security cameras inside. This is how the police got their eyes on the second suspect. However, it would be an anonymous tip that would help them identify him. On March 12th, the police finally tracked down Demario James Atwater. Demario Atwater had a lifelong history of crime. He had been previously convicted of possession of marijuana with intent to sell, trespassing, robbery, and assault, just to name a few. In February 2005, he received 3 years probation after being convicted of breaking into a home. In June 2006, a police officer investigating a burglary confiscated a handgun from him. Demario pled guilty to possessing a firearm while on probation and was sentenced to more time on probation. On February 20th, 2008, he was arrested for carrying a gun while on probation but was released on a $10,000 bond and was set to appear in court on March 3rd. 2 days later, he killed Eve. He was only 21 at the time of the murder, and he literally had had dozens of chances to put his life of crime behind him. The police had ticked one of the two suspects and had tracked down his address to Durham, not far away from Eve's home in Chapel Hill. And as the investigators went through his friends, they found Lawrence Alvin Lovett. Finally, the police had a match for both suspects. Much like Demario, Lawrence was a Durham high school dropout with an extensive criminal record. He'd already been convicted of narcotics possession, larceny, breaking and entering, and felony possession of a gun. In March 2008, 17-year-old Lawrence was on probation for breaking into a house. Clearly, this didn't faze him. In fact, his crimes only got worse with age. On March 12, 2008, news of Demario's arrest flooded North Carolina.
Demario Atwater faced a judge charged with the murder of the UNC student body president. He's not the only suspect either.
Chapel Hill and Durham police are looking for Lawrence Lovett. He is considered armed and dangerous. Warrants also charge him with Carson's murder. This, as of late this afternoon, a standoff unfolded at the home owned by someone with the same last name.
By the end of March, both Lawrence and Demario were indicted on first-degree murder charges. By July, they were also charged with kidnapping, robbery with dangerous weapon, larceny, possession of a firearm by felon, and possession of stolen goods, aka Eve's Toyota. And it got even darker. As the investigators looked into Lawrence's case, they discovered he was also linked to the murder of a 29-year-old engineering student, Abiji Mahato. Imagine being a serial killer at the age of 17. During his trial, Lawrence was tried for both murders, but eventually he was acquitted of Abiji's, as there wasn't enough evidence to convict him. The men's trial lasted 2 whole years, during which the prosecution painted a horrifying picture of what happened that night. At 3:30 a.m. on March 5th, another student was on the phone inside her car on Friendly Lane, where Eve also lived. She noticed 2 men staring at her. Afraid, she drove off, but as she looked in the mirror, she could see the men approach a house. Lawrence and Demario simply picked Eve because she was an easy target, home alone and awake at that time when most people wouldn't be on the street to report a crime. The men broke into Eve's home and dragged her to her car at gunpoint. Eve was forced into the back seat of the SUV, accompanying the two as they tried to withdraw all her money from various ATMs. Eve gave them her PIN number, but after they withdrew $700, they reached the daily limit, and as they made more attempts, the account was blocked. Angry, they drove to the intersection where they decided to kill her, as they explained. Eve had seen their faces, and they were certain she would report them if they let her live. And yet, this was what Lawrence said in court. You know, people make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. I'm not the monster y'all made me out to be. The same man pleaded not guilty and demanded a retrial because he'd gotten a life imprisonment and he was under 18. A second time, the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Yeah, if his justification was that nobody's perfect, he got what was coming for him. DeMario, on the other hand, pleaded guilty to all charges and avoided the death penalty. He was sentenced to life behind bars just before he offered Eve's parents a long apology. But will any apology ever make up for murdering a young woman in cold blood for a petty $700? Eve's death was a tragic ending to a life full of promise. It also stands as a stark reminder of judicial issues. Both of her killers were on probation when they murdered her. They had just about 1,000 opportunities to quit crime, yet they didn't. And authorities gave them a second chance over and over again until they did the very worst. Thanks a bunch for watching, you guys. What do you think about this case? Could Eve's murder have been prevented? And how? Let me know down in the comment section, and before you go, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell button so you never miss a new one. Until next time.